Welcome to this webinar on strengths-based assessment and support planning. My name is Alistair Griffin. I'm a consultant social worker in Hackney Adult Social Care based in the Learning Disability team.
My name is Alice Carmichael. I'm a consultant social worker also in Hackney Adult Social Care, and I'm based in the long-term team.
So this webinar is on strengths-based assessment and support planning and strengths-based assessments. Just as kind of important note, this is predominantly in the basis of adult social care rather than kind of children's perspectives, but even if you are a kind of children's social worker, it still will apply in kind of adults you might work with who might have care and support needs.
So we do have some specific aims and objectives for this webinar today. So the first one is around increasing practitioners' knowledge of what a strength-based approach actually means. We'll be exploring what a strength-based approach is in the context of adult social care, and we'll be talking about specific legislation that links to strength-based approach. To develop further understanding of what a strength-based approach, how that relates to adult social care law. We'll also be considering what makes a good assessment and support plan, and to increase awareness of models for strength-based working. Now, within this webinar, we will be focusing particularly on the 3 conversations model, which is a model that Hackney Adult Social Care have adopted. So that will be our focus in terms of models for strength-based working. There will be time for questions throughout the webinar. We do have sort of some specific time allocated for that. But as this is the live webinar, please don't be shy. Start chatting and ask your questions as you go along, and we'll do our very best to answer them.
Okay, so we'll start on very basically what is strengths-based practice in social care. So strengths-based practice, as you can see on the slides, is a holistic and multidisciplinary and works to individuals to promote their well-being. So one of the main differences maybe other types of other models of adult social care or support is it focuses on what people can do, their individual strengths, their abilities, and what assets they might have. And by assets, that might be family and support networks, it might be their church, it might be community centres that they can go to, it could be their educational background, it could be anything that is a positive in that person's life. And it's a focus on what people can do, not what they can't do. So historically in adult social care, and I'm sure many of you are kind of aware, a lot of the assessments, a lot of the paperwork we fill out, they're very much about what we can't do. You know, how many can you get to the toilet yourself? And if you can't, how many people does it take to help you do that? If you can't make your meals, how many times you need support with that each day? So it's about but this is going to change into the focus of what they can do. So maybe rather than kind of focus on that, you can talk about that they can actually go out, that they have a neighbour that helps with their meals and they don't need a carer coming in. It's about focusing on what people want to achieve and what they want to do. It's an outcome-led. So you also kind of think about where in a lot of social care can be very prescriptive. So it might be 4 times care calls a day, rather than actually what's the kind of outcome someone might want. So it should be collaborative. So rather than you going, this is what your needs are, this is what you should get. And this doesn't eliminate professional judgment, but it's about a collaborative discussion with those people. I'm just seeing on the questions, there's some technical issues. Is that all right? Okay, so it's a collaborative process. So when I'm going to go on to how a good assessment should look like, how support planning should look like in a bit, but it's about being joined with that person, coming alongside them and going to discuss together what their reality is, what the kind of narrative their needs are. Also kind of very important element to this is about risk. So we think about how we live our lives every day, we take risks. We don't, and it's not saying we have a reckless approach to risk, but we make judgments based on what we can and can't do and what we want to do and the risks that might involve. And this is a positive approach towards risk. So where actually if someone doesn't want carers coming in all the time because they find it intrusive, there might be higher risk, say if it's in someone who has jointing issues, might be higher risk of pressure sores. But actually they don't want that intrusive element into their life and they're finding a way to manage, it's about finding ways to kind of reduce those risks, but also give people the chance to make choices and kind of being a bit more, positively approach to risk and less risk averse. Now, in terms of today, this isn't just a kind of theoretical concept that we're looking at. You can see at the bottom there's a link, which we're not going to click on now, but you can look when you get the slides, which is what the kind of government policy this is based on. So this is kind of very high kind of priority for how adult social care and social care more generally should be working. And we'll come on to kind of policy and law in a minute. So why is it important? So if you talk about kind of power dynamics in social care, sort of kind of analysis and social justice, so when we train as social workers, I know there might be some non-social workers as well, but kind of social care more generally, we talk about our role in social justice, about addressing inequalities, about understanding power relationships that we might say as a practitioner have over, or it might be other kind of institutions, organisations and structures in society. With this kind of model, it's about kind of going back to that kind of core root of social work, and thinking about the kind of how we use that power and how we empower people, and focusing on their abilities and strengths, and finding stuff that works for them. As I said earlier, it's about what is important to them rather than what's wrong. And that's not to say this ignores problems, because people do have problems and they need support with it, but it's about finding out what's really important to them rather than just having a one-size-fits-all system that you impose upon them. And what it might be possible as well, and about how they might want to change in their life. Maybe it could be trying to get back into work, where often I imagine if we're working kind of physically disabled, younger people, a lot of the time when we think about kind of assessment, care planning, actually we spend a bit more time with them initially, plan a bit more to what they want to achieve. You might look at getting them back in education or work. And this is one of the kind of key things when we talk about the Hackney version into free conversations. You understanding the community and the area that you're in, and what support is out there is really important. So in Hackney, for example, there's a huge amount of diversity, but with that there's also quite a lot of community support organisations, voluntary sector, and compared to maybe some other areas, quite a good kind of community-focused society in Hackney. And that's what we can tap in, utilise with the people, so the services and support they get aren't so prescriptive. So it's not so, here's a carer, get on with it. You can be a bit more creative and a bit more fluid in the kind of support that you think about. And so that's kind of a brief summary of the kind of change in what the old way of working that most of us have been involved in adult social care, what people are unable to do, and how do they fit those tick boxes that we fill in. And the new focus is in what strengths and support people have to resolve the crisis they might be in, and just to move and build a kind of better quality life for themselves. So obviously that's easier said than done. So these are kind of more kind of practical and kind of side of it we'll come on to in a bit. And as I said, this is not out of the blue. This is not something that's we've kind of just thought of. This is supported as a model of working by, so this is a quote from Lynn Romeo, who is on sabbatical at the moment, is the Chief Social Worker for Adults. So I was going to read this out because it's quite a good quote. Excellent social work is about emphasising the use of professional engagement and judgment as opposed to procedural approaches which focus on the individual, taking a holistic and co-productive approach to keeping the person at the centre of all decisions, identifying what matters to them and how best the outcomes can be achieved. It is about enabling people to find the best solutions for themselves, to support them in making independent decisions about how they live. And I wholeheartedly believe in taking a strengths and asset-based approach to support individuals and empower people to live the lives they want. So I said, this is where this is someone whose job essentially is to work with government around social work practice, and this is quite fundamental to how both the government and kind of senior figures in social work and social care see the adult social care sector kind of progressing in terms of ways of working.
Thank you. So thank you, Alistair. So within this webinar, as Alistair and I said, we will be covering a little bit around policy and law. Obviously, the legislation is quite extensive on this topic, so we have sort of at a later date, we have attached some further reading, which would be helpful for you to do once you have the slides. But just sort of the key policy and law we'll be talking about is the Care Act 2014, and we'll be talking about some of the key messages from the Care Act and how that links with a strength-based approach and the practical side of things. There's the Care and Support Statutory Guidance, the Human Rights Act 1998, the Mental Capacity Act 2005, which was enforced in 2007. That's particularly key when you're looking about supporting somebody to make decisions for themselves, like Alistair touched on previously around looking at risk and taking a positive approach to risk. The Mental Capacity Act is fundamental when thinking about things like that. We wanted to make reference to safeguarding policy and procedure. Making safeguarding personal really sort of enforces the model around strength-based working and looking at what outcomes a person wants to achieve as opposed to looking at the problems and how they can be solved. And also, as Alistair specialises in learning disabilities, we put in there Transforming Care for People with Learning Disabilities 2015. We thought that'd be a really relevant piece of legislation to add in there. The Department of Health and Social Care have developed a strength-based approach, practice framework and practice handbook, which was published in 2019. This handbook shows what strength-based practice is and how it fits in the law. Alistair and I found it really helpful when we were preparing for this webinar and devising this presentation to have a look at that, and we have attached links to that so you can do some bedtime reading if you want to. It was a really good piece of it was a really good handbook that is really informative. So we've attached the links to that.
And as I said, there's also a lot more legislation and policy that might impact this, but this is just a kind of headlines and overviews of the kind of stuff that relates to it.
Yeah. Some of the key messages from the Care Act 2014, and again, this isn't the only messages that the Care Act 2014 says, but these are the things that we thought were really sort of crucial to mention today. So the Care Act 2014 requires local authorities to consider the person's own strengths and capabilities and what support might be available from wider support networks or within the community to help in considering what else other than provision of care and support might assist the person in meeting the outcomes they want to achieve. So Alistair touched on this in the earlier slides. So it is really about considering what is in their own person's capability, not focusing on what they can't do and what problems they have, but what can they do for themselves and what are their strengths. And that could be, like Alistair mentioned, it could be personal strengths or personal things that they want to achieve in their life. And again, with that, it's about really making sure that we see people as individuals, because how one person might want to live their life might be completely different to how another person wants to live their life. So it is that reinforcing about considering what the person's own strengths are. And again, thinking creatively. So not just thinking about sort of the traditional care packages, but what is in the person's wider support network to help them achieve what they want to do. And that could be sort of local community groups, or it could be from an educational point of view or volunteer point of view. So there's lots of things that could be considered outside of the norm in terms of sort of a domiciliary home care package, for example. So local authorities should identify the individual's strengths, personal, community and social networks, and maximise these strengths to enable them to achieve their desired outcomes, thereby meeting their needs and improving or maintaining their well-being. As we all know, well-being is paramount in the Care Act. So again, it's looking at the person's personal, community, social networks, what's important to them, what strengths do they have, what outcomes do they want to achieve. Okay, so, and again, when it's looking at personal networks, it could be that you're looking at what support family or friends can do. So any suggestion that support could be available from family and friends should be considered in the likeness of their appropriateness, willingness and ability to provide any additional support. With that, you also want to consider what the impact of them providing support may be. And then you can think about things like carers assessments and how sustainable that is. It's important to note that, whilst, family and friends, they don't have a legal duty to provide, their loved ones with support. But if they do have an indication that they want to help, then do consider that as part of the support plan if the person wants that as well. Okay, so the objective of the strength-based approach is to promote the individual's independence, resilience, ability to make choices, and also with a strong focus on well-being. Supporting the person's strengths can help address needs, whether or not they are eligible, for support in a way that allows people to lead and be in control of an ordinary and independent day-to-day life as much as possible. It may also help the development of needs. So we're looking at what can we do to prevent people from maybe becoming unwell, or so it's thinking about sort of rehabilitation services potentially, or re-ablement services. And also there's a strong focus here in terms of whether or not they are eligible. We have a duty to provide information and advice. So it could be about helping them access their local community, or developing an awareness of what is in their local community. So it's about making sure that they have all the information and advice to help them make an informed decision about whether they want to access any of the support that could be available for them.
I think that delaying needs is a really important point as well, because in terms of this model, it can appear to be quite time intensive, maybe initially more kind of cost intensive. Mm-hmm. But there's quite a lot of evidence. You look at people who are engaged socially in the community, who are active physically, they're so much more less likely to then experience kind of significant health problems later on, and kind of delay the development of those health problems, which now it's important to note this is not a cost-saving model in itself, but hopefully by adopting this kind of approach, you will help and prevent and delay the development of needs kind of further down the line.
And with sort of delaying the development of needs, obviously we just touched on sort of looking at what community rehabilitation services there are, and also the ethos of re-ablement, but also things like telecare and equipment that could help people become more independent within their home. So there's a wide range of things that could be explored. So it's worth looking at the different services in your sort of local council and within adult social care to see what there is available for the people that you're working with. Okay, so this is a little bit just about strength-based interventions, and we do have a little bit of a film within this just to help illustrate what we've spoken about, and to give yourselves a little bit of a break from hearing Alistair and I's voice. So we do hope that's helpful. But just to sort of go on a little bit more about what the Care Act says, because this is a really important quote. So Care Act 2014 puts a strength-based approach at the centre of someone's assessment, care and support, highlighting what is strong rather than simply what is wrong, which is exactly what we've been speaking about today. It's about focusing on somebody's strengths and what they can do as opposed to what they cannot do. This means that strengths and talents are identified so that things that are important to people are taken into account. This will help to promote individual well-being. So the film that we're about to play, it will look at strength-based interventions, which are holistic, person-centred and outcome-focused to help improve people's lives. So we'll just go on to the film.
A strengths-based approach. A simple phrase that has different meanings for different people, but an approach that, when done right, opens up many possibilities. A strengths-based approach can be used in any intervention, in any setting, with any client group, including carers, and by any social or healthcare member of staff. The Care Act puts a strengths-based approach at the centre of any intervention, placing the individual and not only their problems at the centre of the process, and highlighting what is strong rather than what is wrong, identifying the resources someone has within themselves as well as who and what support they have around them. This ensures that all their strengths and talents are identified and considered in all interventions, not just their needs and personal outcomes, such as what is important for them or what they would like to achieve. At the end of the day, the core duty of the Care Act is to promote individual well-being, which is broader than meeting eligible needs. Interventions become holistic, person-centred, and outcomes-focused, which are key elements for a strengths-based approach and will result in better outcomes and lives for individuals. As individuals, we are all different, and the Care Act recognises this. As individuals, we have multiple skills, knowledge, talents, character traits, relationships and abilities. Social care interventions should consider all of those rather than a one-size-fits-all based on the catch-all labels such as disability, dementia, or simply old. When we look beyond these labels, amazing potential is revealed. Anne is a 67-year-old woman who speaks 2 languages, has a wide knowledge of international affairs, politics and environmental concerns. She speaks confidently, is very organised, reliable and is witty. She loves interacting with people, learning and teaching. Anne is not just an elderly, lonely person with hearing and sight loss who is finding it very difficult to manage around the house and unable to go out on her own. See what we just did there? We unfolded Anne. By asking the right questions and talking to Anne, we found out about her, beyond her needs, illness or impairment. Rob is a 75-year-old man who lives with his wife in a first-floor flat, and he has 1 daughter who lives in another city. Rob has difficulty communicating, and up to now, his wife and daughter have spoken to professionals on his behalf. Rob has a care package to support him and his wife as a carer. Rob had a fall, and a reassessment has to take place. The practitioner commissions an independent advocate, Leanne, to maximise Rob's involvement in the process. During the conversation, we discover that Rob loves being outdoors and is a very sociable person with a current difficulty in expressing himself verbally. But he has many manual abilities. Does it sound familiar? And the unfolding of possibilities and strengths doesn't stop with the individual. Their many facets, needs and talents can and do integrate with their wider world. Carers, friends, family, community and professionals are all actual elements in their life texture and well-being. Through a strengths-based approach, we support the individual to identify their personal outcomes, their needs and their strengths, including social and family networks and other universal resources available to them. We can then work together to identify how strengths, individual and community resources, can support them to improve their lives. This may be, for example, the local council, their skills or knowledge, a friend, library, neighbour, health club, or a social group. And for practitioners, a whole lot of extra work during intervention? No. When we talk with individuals, we have to create relationships based on a collaborative process that will enable us to explore together what their strengths, needs, and personal outcomes are. We need to move away from asking questions on a form to having a conversation and building a relationship. Move from what problems are you having preparing a meal or getting out of the house to what does a good day look like for you? It is generally not easy to identify one's strengths, and adults and carers can find it difficult. There are useful tools, for example, asking the right questions, strengths mapping, motivational interviewing, recovery model, 3 houses, and so on. These can support practitioners and individuals in identifying strengths. They are all different, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all, as individuals are different. Using these tools, people can discover assets and strengths they have or could have access to, and that may be through local facilities, professionals, or their own talents, or those of a friend or family member. Strengths and assets come in many shapes, sizes, and ages. When we, practitioners and individuals, work collaboratively, we open up that apparently simple circumstance of each individual and unfold a whole world of possibilities. So, what about Anne? The practitioner supported Anne to contact the nearby university. There are many overseas students there who need help with their English conversation skills, and now Anne is visited twice a week by students and really enjoys the company and the teaching. Anne now has something to look forward to, which helps increase her overall sense of well-being. And Rob? The strengths-based approach has helped to identify Rob's interest and knowledge in gardening. Rob lives in a flat with no garden, but his first-floor neighbour has a garden and doesn't know how to take care of it. So they agree to work on it together, once a week or so, and Rob is delighted with this idea. His wife, who had not thought of this, is also very happy and will get a break on a weekly basis from her caring role. Sometimes individuals need support to get involved in the process, and we must look at how we can do this by changing times for meetings, locations, bridging gaps in communication needs, providing an independent advocate, and so on. So, when we take a strengths-based approach, we look at the wide array of skills and assets of and around the individual. We can involve and link with family, community, organisations, practitioners, local authorities, or facilities and services in working out the best way for their well-being to be promoted. And most important of all, we work together towards achieving the best possible lives and outcomes for individuals. A strengths-based approach, unfolding great lives and outcomes.
Great. Well, hopefully that was helpful. So we now got some space for discussion. And I know some of you are watching this in groups, looking up on a screen. So if you're going to give like a kind of minute to kind of have a discussion if you're in groups, or have a think if you're on your own. If anyone's got any comments or questions, please write them to us and we can discuss it after that. So we'll give you just a little minute now, and then we've got some thoughts as well we can kind of share.
And if we don't have time to get through all the questions, because we are sort of allocating about 5 minutes to this, but we do have 2 other time slots throughout the webinar for questions, and obviously at the end, if there's time, we can go back on the questions that we might not have had time to answer at this particular break. So we'll give you a minute just to have some thoughts, either individually or amongst yourself.
Don't be shy as well.
We have got one comment here, which I think is a really good comment. So thank you for saying this. It's family links. The direct comment is family links can be a very challenging strength. Changeable, yes. We absolutely acknowledge that, and we do. When we're working with individuals and with their families, there's obviously often family dynamics that can become quite challenging when working with a person, and when you're trying to sort of focus on what that individual's personal outcomes are and what they want to achieve, and balancing that with the views of the family, the views of the family and their sort of intervention with it. I think what's important is sort of we have to take a proportionate response. So we do need to be mindful that people do have a right to family life, and we do need to be mindful that often people do want their family involved, or sometimes don't want their family involved. So I think it's trying not to lose the person when you are working with somebody with maybe extended family members who do have various opinions about how that person should be living their life. It's really just drawing it back on what the Care Act says about focusing on the individual's personal strengths, what outcomes they want to achieve, thinking about human rights legislation, thinking about mental capacity and whether that person has the capacity to make their own decisions. So I think it can be very difficult, but I think, there's lots of legislation which helps us in terms of how we work with people and how we work with families as well. I think something we spoke about that's important before is families, they don't have a duty to provide care and support to their loved ones. And we might want them to, but that doesn't always work out that way.
I think in terms of the idea of strengths is family might not be a strength. You might have a very toxic relationship with your family. It might be negative. If you go into more systemic approaches, it's about the kind of quality and the of those kind of relationships. And actually, maybe they've got other strengths otherwhere. It's just maybe an example where kind of a common one might be kind of family, but many people don't have a kind of support network or individuals that might be able to help them. Just kind of an example of something as well, we're kind of talking about communities. So I've done some work with kind of young offenders and have been involved with gangs, and often their community is not a strength. They might have lots of individual strengths, but their community there might be issues, there might be targeted, whatever it is. So actually it's about kind of the whole point of it is kind of finding what their individual strengths are and where and how you can help encourage them and access them more and kind of focus on them.
And I think as well, if you are working with somebody and there's lots of family members around who might have a different opinion of, like I said, about how that person should be living, do think about independent advocacy, because I think that can be really important in making sure that the person's views don't get lost throughout the assessment and support planning person, and the advocate can be there to help represent what decisions that person wants to be made when when there are family members who might have differences of opinion in that.
Okay.
Are there any other questions at this time that you might want to?
Let's got one.
Oh, there's one.
So I was going to read the questions. Really.
Yeah.
So let's read out one comment. So from a supervisor and social worker, has taken some useful points on personal strengths to support foster carers in their role in identifying their abilities, and I can deal with crises and identifying future training needs. So that's a good point. And I suppose that my analysis expertise is adult social care. This is very adult social care focused presentation, but this model applies to everything. It applies to children's social work, and it would apply to families in crisis, or in this example is foster carers, where there might be issues with if the child's just moved in. And there might be issues that are actually kind of focused on those strengths. This can apply as well. And again, I think it's important, this is not ignoring problems as well. And there's also a comment here about reviews and how within the kind of time frames, and I guess that's kind of about how the organisational requirements fit into this. And that's really important about this point. We're going to come on to the kind of model that Hackney's trialling, is that this is about, you can do individual things as practitioners, but this is also about systematic change and organisational change. In terms of focus like this, things like review time frames, certain kind of models of allocation, see person once, you write it up, you get rid of it and you move on. That can be quite difficult, this model, so that's where we're going to need to kind of change at more kind of organisational level.
I think when there's a particular reference to sort of the review timeframes, just be mindful that, and we'll go on to a little bit more around this, but when you're reviewing somebody's care and support needs or their care and support plan, you would have hoped that a lot of the discussions that have already taken place about what their individual strengths are, what outcomes they want to achieve, and how that can be met. So you wouldn't necessarily have to go through all of that again. It's about making sure that you're you spend some time preparing for your assessment or your review, look at what information you already have about that person, so you're not asking them to repeat everything to you. And also it's about taking a proportionate approach as well, depending on sort of the situation. Hope that helps.
So we're going to move on to the next slide now. Thanks for that. So preparing for an assessment. Now, there's nothing revolutionary on this slide. There's nothing that...
Best practice.
It's what we should be doing every day, but sometimes we kind of forget about the kind of really basic stuff with assessments. And we're using the language assessment here. I guess you're going to kind of rephrasing some of the language, which we'll come on to as well. But it's something that most people will know and be using the assessment terminology, that actually this kind of preparation can have a real impact on the work you do with the person.
And also the time, when somebody mentioned before about the timeframes for doing an assessment, actually this prep work can help actually you save a lot of time in the future when you actually sort of conduct the assessment.
So I'm not going to kind of read through all of them individually because you can see them, but about how we do assessments and how we engage with the person can be different. I'll give an example. So one of the things I do, I manage the autism service for social care, and where often with people with autism can really struggle with face-to-face meetings and those kind of conversations. So what actually someone did with someone who refused to meet us full stop, that did need care support, was around, actually they conducted it via text and email. And it took 6 weeks or so of texting back and forward to get a real idea of that person's needs, their strengths, their support networks, everything like that. But it's about kind of agreeing with the service users, the people that you're working with and their family, about how's the best way to approach it. And it might actually be that you might need to do a bit more work. You might need to see them multiple times and kind of develop a relationship and try and build a bit more of an idea of their sense of identity, their sense of self. And ideally, when talking about the network, networks theory, and kind of applies and relates to a strengths-based perspective, but involving that network in your assessment, your review, your intervention, whatever you're calling it, can be really helpful and really important. You kind of get a wider understanding of the person, and more holistic understanding, where often, we've all done review assessment meetings, we've been rushed and spending 30 minutes just getting basic details, and you never can talk about it again. It gets put on a bit of paper that no one probably ever reads. So it needs to become a meaningful assessment. It's a really obvious one, but know what you're talking about. Ensure appropriate knowledge and expertise. And if you don't know answer to questions, because I'm not going to be omnipotent, but being able to actually go back and get back to people, might have something, say, with care charging, adult social care, where people have to get means tested. If you don't know how much it's going to cost, go back and find out and tell them. But also know your kind of background information. If you're working, say, with, in my case, learning disabilities, know about the impact of learning disabilities and autism, how that will impact on their relationship to others, how it might affect their social interaction, how it might impact what they can do for themselves.
And it's the same with, if you're thinking about working with somebody with, say, dementia. Dementia is an umbrella name for a condition. So, what type of dementia do they have? What impact can this have on their ability to maybe live independently, or how they'd contribute to an assessment? So just just do your homework basically around, so you go better prepared in terms of when you're carrying out the assessment.
Yeah, and in a sense, what it is, and it's going back to that understanding of where I think a lot of practitioners we can become quite task orientated, very procedural. We're actually kind of knowing the theory, knowing the evidence about the things you're doing is really important. And I know this will sound obvious, everyone this is not revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination, but kind of going back and thinking, and maybe next time you do a review or a meeting with anyone, really can think and take 20 minutes, half an hour to really think about what you're going to get, what you're going to do with that person. So we'll move on to now this is taken directly out of the Care Act in terms of proportionate and appropriate assessments, but this applies for anything. One of the things we're really trying to change within the paperwork in Hackney is of making it a lot less bureaucratic, and that's both for practitioners but also for the people themselves. So the assessment document that we currently use, the standard one, is long, it's complicated, it's full of jargon, and I don't know realistically how many people that we send them out to probably actually read them. So actually think about assessment in the Care Act is about being proportionate, and actually maybe a phone call's enough for that person. Maybe that one-off meeting is enough. Maybe actually just tell them, actually you go speak, it might be about housing. Actually, you don't need to speak to us. Go to housing, they're going to be the best people to support you. Or save them time rather than going on a waiting list. And you still actually are kind of meeting your statutory obligations, but you're kind of working in a much more proportionate way to that person. Because often people can feel very over-assessed and often kind of repeatedly assessed by multiple different professionals.
I think that's what you mentioned before about, when you are carrying out a review, for example, take your time, read the previous assessment, read the support plan. Don't go over sort of the same questions about the person's medical conditions and things like that, unless there's anything new that comes up. But you can take a proportionate response, particularly if there's lots of information already on the person.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about checking in that things are still accurate, but are not about kind of repeating everything. Because that's one of the common frustrations we get when we work with people. And appropriate. So communication needs, we talk about a little bit more, but it's really obvious. If a person can't speak English, get an interpreter. If someone has kind of difficulty in reading, think about accessible information, accessible assessments. So learning disability might be more kind of pictorial, those kind of things. When you're assessing people, Parkinson's, for example, a medication they take in the morning, they can really kind of struggle to engage until that medication kicks in. So if you're doing it at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's probably not going to be the best time. Okay, so what makes a good assessment? So we've kind of talked about an element of this, and this information is we've taken from the SCIES, the Social Care Institute of Excellence website in terms of what makes a good assessment, and this is the link so you can kind of look at this directly. But you can be flexible, and I've talked about it more about kind of texting as an example, but just ways that you interact with people, ask how they want to be involved in that assessment and how they going to find it easiest and how you're going to do that. So another example worked with someone where it's a hospital discharge case, and there's a hospital multidisciplinary team meeting where we discuss the discharge, the needs, etc. Now, best practice, of course, to have that person there in that room and they can talk about it and they can speak directly to professionals. But some people might find that very stressful, might find it unable to understand, especially talking about legal jargon or medical jargon, whatever it is. So kind of giving the person that choice. And some people will want to be in that meeting, will be fully able to do that. But just about, maybe it might be easier for them to come at the beginning, you explain it, and then when at the end you come and tell them afterwards. Or it might be something you start telling them, a loved one, a family member, advocate, and then kind of communicating it at times kind of more comfortable for them. So, and again, holistic, whole person approach, I know you've heard it a million times, but it is meaningful. Actually, think about that person's environment, think about what's kind of around them, think about them as a person rather than a set of needs. It's so easy to slip into, here is Mrs. X, she's got dementia, she's 85, she's frail, blah, 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 and you've got a picture of that person that you immediately put a kind of care package on without any kind of identity of that person, what it means for them, who they are. And that's the kind of what holistic for me kind of means, is to understand actually who someone is and how do they relate to the world around them.
Another key point, sorry, can we just go back? Another key point is around be professional, be honest, be open, and be approachable. So if you're conducting an assessment, or if you're conducting an assessment, make sure the person's aware that that you are doing an assessment. Explain what the process is, explain the relevance of it, explain the possible outcomes and what you're trying to achieve. Make sure you listen to people. I think that's really, really key. It might take a little time if they have, communication difficulties, or if there's an advocate present, or if there's capacity issues, but make sure you listen to somebody and get a sense of what they want, how they want to live their lives, what outcomes they want to achieve. Be really clear that you might not be able to cover everything in this one visit, that actually it's okay to have a break and come back and meet again, or it could be that actually they would prefer to have somebody else present to talk about certain aspects of their life. So just be flexible in your approach to that. Try and build trust with people. I know that this is difficult with everybody's kind of increasing caseloads and time restraints, but really try and build that relationship with people. The better relationship you have with somebody, the more you'll understand about who they are as a person, because they will naturally open up to you. Think about your conversations. We'll do a little bit. We've got some slides covering communication. But think about what the sort of questions you can ask to help people open up and to help people give you as much information that they can about themselves. Be clear with them around what you don't want to do is sort of make false promises. So be clear with them about sort of the possible outcomes from the assessment. One of the most important things is, and we'll speak a little bit more about this, but don't use jargon. Not everybody understands, the complex, world of social care and the sort of legislation that we work under. Break down the language, break down the information that you're giving somebody to help them be part of that assessment and to help them, make informed decisions.
And as we're going to talk about the importance of communication, it's already kind of mentioned it, a lot of the kind of practical steps, interpreters, BSL, the idiom, Makaton, all those kind of things, and we can be quite poor from my experience that sometimes they're kind of taking that into account, and you might be listening to carers, as in kind of maybe home carers, domiciliary care, those kind of things, and you listen to professionals around the person because it's easier and it's quicker. When in reality, for strengths-based to work, you need to spend time with that person. And some people might not be able to communicate sometimes at all in an assessment process, obviously but they're the minority. And even then, there's still going to be information about that person and their identity and how they interact with the world. And just talk about advocacy is really important as a legal statutory duty as well as a kind of ethical, moral one, in terms of making sure that person has support to voice their views. And we're not going to go into it massively here, but in terms of motivational interviewing, which is a type of intervention process that is quite related to strengths-based process, it's a kind of therapy, a way of talking to people, and there's kind of separate courses on it, but it looks about again identifying what that person wants to achieve and kind of reflecting back to them their views and their ideas rather than it being a kind of dictating exercise.
There are some links to, within the slide, there are links to motivational interviewing techniques, which again, when you're thinking about the styles of communicating with somebody, have a read and look back on it. It is really helpful.
And I just thought I would highlight again, the use of language is really important and how we communicate as people. And I think actually going back to the kind of very basic of relationships and how we can build that as practitioners and people we work with rather than just being a gatekeeper of resource, and that avoiding jargon is so important. So even once, something as basic as GP, I once was working with someone who was using the term GP for weeks and they had no idea that I meant doctor. And it sounds so simple, but things like that, just be as kind of straightforward and as basics, not maybe the best word, but with your kind of language or communication with the people you work with.
One of the things that I found quite interesting when I worked in a hospital setting is that you get used to sort of using language and abbreviations that people really don't understand. So when you're writing your assessment support plans, using things like QDS, which I'm sure some people in this webinar might not be sure what that is, and people at home won't be, people receiving these support plans have no idea what you mean when you write QDS. If you're working in a medical setting, that means 4 times daily when you're referring to care. So think about the language that you're using, because actually it needs to be meaningful to the person.
Yeah, most people don't know acronyms, let alone Latin-based acronyms. So.
Yeah.
And this is from the Sky website. This is a quote from a service user, I think maybe a carer. I often notice how service users and carers can feel powerless when they get involved with professionals. Social workers often think they know best, even when they don't, and impose their way of thinking or their beliefs on users and carers' lives. I think it's really important that we recognise and respect people's expertise and views about their own situation, and be really upfront and honest with them about our views and concerns, when we're much better equipped to develop a shared understanding and an agreement about what the aim of the work is. So again, it's going back to the kind of basics of social work, of use of self, reflection of your own values, identity, all those kind of things, and how that interrelates in the relationships that you work with.
And within that, think about when it's talking about it's really important that we respect people's expertise and views about their own situation. Do link that to sort of legislation around mental capacity and human rights legislation, and in the context of safeguarding, making safeguarding personal. So you can see there's an interlink between everything really in terms of the legislation and how it's saying we should be working with somebody. Okay, so again, the Care Act 2014 obviously has some statutory guidance, so we've just picked out a couple of bits that we thought were really key, and I'll read them out now. Okay, so section 6.1, the assessment should be designed to reflect the wishes of the person being assessed, taking into account their presenting needs and their circumstances. An assessment process which benefits an individual in one instance may not necessarily be as effective for another. So again, it's focusing on how you actually work with an individual as opposed to how you might work with a group of people. Local authorities should recognise this, and in order to maintain a person-centred approach, local authorities must ensure that assessments are flexible to each individual case. And being flexible, it could be, like we've said before, it could be how you communicate with somebody, how you carry out that assessment, whether it's a telephone, whether it's a face-to-face meeting, whether it's an assessment that's conducted over a few meetings, who you involve, how you involve people, how you give them information to support their sort of participation in the assessment. So really get to know the people that you're working with in terms of preparing for your assessment to make sure that you are working in a person-centred way. So section 6.2 talks about the assessment process starts from when the local authorities begin to collect information about the person and will be an integral part of the person's journey through the care and support system as their needs change. It should not be just seen as a gateway to care and support, but should be a critical intervention in its own right, which can help people to understand the situation and the needs they have, to reduce the delay of the onset of greater needs, and to access support when they require it. So again, think about your rehabilitation services, think about reablement services, think about telecare, think about the information and advice people might need in regards to how to live a healthier lifestyle, for example. Okay. It can also help people to understand their strengths and capabilities and the support available to them in the community and through other networks and services. And it links back to everything that we've been talking about in terms of understanding the person's strengths, what outcomes they want to achieve, and looking at making sure that you really understand the local community and what's, and how they could link that person to the resources that are available to them. Statutory guidance continued, and again, I don't expect you to all remember this. There is links that we.
It's not the most fun bit of the presentation.
No, yeah, there are links. So it's just really some key points that we wanted to include in this webinar. So section 6.5, the aim of the assessment is to identify what needs the person may have and what outcomes they're looking to achieve to maintain or improve their wellbeing. So again, what we said throughout this webinar, the outcome of the assessment is to provide a full picture of the individual's needs so that a local authority can provide an appropriate response at the right time to meet the level of the person's needs. Again, at the right time. What you don't want to do is delay things, because it could lead to unset of needs. The Department of Health and Social Care really focuses that the assessment is not the document or form. And, I remember when I was starting out as a social worker, I wrote the questions down that I wanted to ask people, and I looked down at the paper and wrote underneath. It's about having a discussion with people. It's not everybody fits within a form or within a box. So have a discussion with the person that you're working with. Think about how you can get them to open up, and it links in with the motivational interviewing techniques, having an open conversation, thinking about your style of communication, that it's not just a tick box exercise, basically. So the assessment is a holistic intervention. The process of gathering information, it can consist of various visits, several conversations, reading documents, and all of that will help you understand the person and the appropriateness and the proportionality of the assessment that you need to carry out with that person. So there are ways to approach an assessment, and we picked two options here. So option one, simply talk to the client about his or her life. This option occurs in a natural but guided conversation designed to help the person think about and identify their strengths and abilities. Pick up on their stories that they tell you that reflects the person's abilities. It could be stories about what's important to them, their social hobbies, what leisure activities they like, what they enjoy doing in the home, their education, so all of those sorts of things. So pick up on the stories that they tell you and draw on them. So summarise or use open-ended questions to encourage people to speak about themselves and about their experiences. For example, earlier you noticed something about a job at the corner market. Tell me more about what you did to find that job and to get hired. So it's thinking about the style of communication that you're using and the questions that you're using when you are doing an assessment. And option two, which Alistair will talk about.
So again, it's basically that starting that conversation rather than it being going through that tick box form. It's about some examples of questions there, and then some more on the next slide as well about, what are you good at, what are your abilities, and actually very rarely think people don't ask you that very often, and actually will make that person think and reflect. Those kind of open questions and that kind of conversational approach can get a lot more out than you going through a kind of prescriptive tick box exercise. And it's just some more examples of kind of strengths-based questions that you can use. You can look at them in your own kind of time, but it's like just kind of ideas and prompts that you might be able to kind of use if you're kind of struggling to get that kind of conversation rapport going.
So we have got a little bit of a video, again, just to illustrate what we've been speaking about, but it talks about the concept of a strength-based approach under the Care Act 2014.
The main aim of the Care Act 2014 is to promote people's well-being and independence. The assessment process aims to put people at the centre of understanding their needs and how they can achieve their goals. At the heart of this change is the focus on a strengths-based approach, or what some people call an asset-based approach. This is nothing new. It's a core principle of social care. Both research and practice show that a crucial dimension of well-being is the ability and opportunity to benefit from and contribute to one's own community. This involves everybody, from people using services to their carers and friends, and the practitioners supporting them, to understand what this approach means and how it supports assessment and eligibility. What exactly is meant by a strengths-based approach? Put simply, it takes the glass half full perspective rather than the glass half empty one. It is a fundamental shift from a focus on what people can't do to focusing on the skills, abilities and experiences that people already have and those they wish to acquire or develop. Until now, assessments have usually measured people's needs created by ill health and disability and then allocated public sector resources to meet these needs. To ensure the continuing health and well-being as a nation, it's important to invest in people to help prevent, reduce or delay the development of needs. The CARE Act requires the consideration of the outcomes people want to achieve. Through the assessment, people can be supported to realise what they can do and how best to use their skills and networks to achieve their outcomes. This approaches support differently because the person is at the centre of how their needs are met and is enabled to benefit from their community and to be as involved as they can or want to be. Meet Joshua. He is 72 and lives by himself since his wife died 2 years ago.
When Sandra, my social worker, came round, we spoke about me feeling lonely. We also talked for ages about what I'd done in the past. I told her about my days working as a cook in the Merchant Navy, in the restaurant trade, and just how much I love being in the kitchen. On her next visit, she mentioned they were looking for somebody to help out in the canteen at the social club.
Here, the assessor and manager at the social club worked together to create an opportunity for Joshua to use his skills. Joshua is less isolated, and the social club has a new volunteer, so using the strengths and finding the opportunities in the existing community has worked. Under the CARE Act, all assessments and care and support plans should be outcome-focused, finding out how a person wants to live their life and how this can be achieved. Within a strengths-based approach to assessments, everything revolves around the individual. Asking people about their skills and abilities and the resources they can access gives people more choice and control over their lives. Practitioners need to have the confidence and communication skills to engage with people and know how to listen, record, summarise and feed back what they have learned about that person's priorities. Different techniques can be used to identify strengths. Strengths mapping is one. It starts by considering a community's strengths, the individual and the collective, the hard tangible and the soft intangible. The picture created is useful in building individual and community confidence in their strengths and establishing a shared agenda. A strengths-based conversation is often useful. Meet Sandra, who works in social care.
I can see how it offers opportunities and helps people to fulfil personal goals.
The strengths-based approach encourages people to work together to understand how a person's care and support needs can be met in different ways, including identifying their own strengths and of those of people around them, for example, family members and their community. Assessments should now be about supporting people to take the lead in finding solutions. Recognising their contribution helps to build confidence and strengthens their ability to take control over their lives. It involves looking at the resources available from the public sector, the private sector, the community and the individual. Schools, libraries, GP surgeries, social clubs and local businesses should all be considered to see what they can offer.
Perhaps you can try approaching people with experience of motivating others, like teachers or office workers who can help with communication, people with musical talent, and people with manual skills such as carpentry or plumbing.
As practitioners discover more about the local community, different opportunities will present themselves. Building a comprehensive knowledge of local community groups and their services will enable assessors to be better placed to signpost and encourage people to where they can find out more for themselves, and where applicable, local area coordinators should be utilised. Fundamental to the successful implementation of the strengths-based approach is buy-in from everyone: local authority management, assessors, commissioners and the community.
It is a cultural shift and it's not going to be straightforward. As practitioners, we still have to make sure that needs are met and outcomes are achieved in a sustainable way. We can begin with a change in approach to assessment. Local authorities can expand commissioning practice, and we can change the way we communicate with the whole community.
The need for assessors and commissioners to identify what else is available within the community becomes a priority.
But not everyone lives and works in the same area. Time is necessary to research and scope what opportunities and resources are available in their communities.
Everybody needs to be prepared to work in new ways and to collaborate with different partners. Remember Joshua, volunteering in the social club kitchen? A strengths-based approach encourages individuals to make the most of their strengths and abilities and feel part of the process, not separate from it. Social inclusion, opportunity and well-being are core principles that underpin a strengths-based approach. Together, they are essential to building better health and social care.
Great. So, like last time, there was a section for discussion, but I think what we'll do, just to make sure we kind of finish on time, is we'll have some, whatever, kind of when we finish, kind of 10 minutes at the end, we can discuss it more, because it's all kind of common themes. I think kind of takeaway from that video and kind of the assessment work is kind of creativity is really important about kind of changing the kind of support you might consider. So Alex is going to talk now about the kind of support plans, about how kind of different ways you might be able to do it.
Again, nothing, when I'm looking at the information here, and when Alison and I were reading and sort of getting the information for this webinar, this shouldn't be anything new to you. It is really best practice. So again, so developing the strength-based care and support plan. So it should be person-led. So that's really straightforward. So the person should be the centre of their support planning. The plan should be jointly developed with the local authority, alone or with family, friends, or whoever the person may wish to involve. So again, just think about who that person wants to be included in their support plan. We've mentioned this before, but really crucial, and it's a statutory requirement for us to think about the need for advocacy supports. And again, it could be that somebody needs an advocate when there's, even if there's family involved, it is about making sure the person's views are represented in the decision making about their care support and how that's provided. Or it could be that that person just doesn't have anybody to advocate for them. How does eligibility impact the approach? So as we all know, we are working under a statutory framework in terms of our eligibility criteria. So do think about the eligibility criteria when you are doing your assessment and when you are thinking about the support plan, okay? So that's really key to remember that we are working towards a national framework when it comes to eligibility. Again, we've mentioned this. Consider what a person can do for themselves and how they can meet their own outcomes. So the community resources, their own personal resources. Strength-based approach doesn't not necessarily mean cheaper. I think that's quite important to keep that in there. And it should be outcome-led and not service-led. So really, this isn't about cutting costs. It's about putting the person at the centre of their support planning.
I think that's really important. So there's a lot of evidence and research into various different approaches. It might be the recovery model in mental health, or free conversations, the model that Hackney's using, I'll come on to in a minute. But the cost element is that this is a way of working. Now the evidence is that this kind of approach in the long term hopefully does reduce need in the future because people remain independent for longer. But actually strengths-based approaches might be more expensive than a traditional service model. Might be someone that is, for example, they could be able to make their own drinks or a cup of tea or whatever in the kitchen, but it takes them a couple of minutes to be taken with a carer to go make that cup of tea for themselves. Whereas obviously the cheaper and quicker way would be for the carers to make it for them. But actually the evidence is if you do this kind of work, they retain that kind of cognitive functioning, the functional tasks that they keep doing for themselves, they're getting up and they're exercising, the long-term effects is that hopefully then that person will not need more care and support. So if you ever hear from people that, you need to think of more strengths-based, this needs to be cheaper, it might be right, but the actual statutory guidance says this in terms of the kind of cost element of strengths-based support planning.
And when you're thinking about how you write a strength-based care and support plan, again, this isn't anything new, but just think it should reflect the identity of the person, so not just the problems. So be mindful of just sort of listing, making a long list of somebody's medical conditions, for example. Is that really relevant for the support plan? The support plan should be a reflection about how that person's needs are going to be met, what outcomes they want to achieve, what their wishes are. So be mindful about just listing somebody's problems and their medical conditions and whether that's helpful for the person in the context of their support planning. Also think about if you are doing that, if you are listing medical conditions and problems, do you actually understand the medical conditions that you're listing? If you don't, then you need to make sure that the information that you're giving is relatable, and also why you've put it there. What does it mean in the context of this person's support plan? Again, and it links with avoid using jargons and acronyms and abbreviations, because not everybody knows what they mean. One of the key things you need to remember that this is a person's support plan, it's not yours. Okay, so the person who you've written it for needs to be able to understand it. If they don't understand it, then there's no point in it being there. So they need to be able to read it. It also must be accessible to others. If they want that support plan shared with their neighbour, with their family, with a family member, with a friend, they all need to be able to understand the information that's in the support plan, particularly if they're responsible for meeting some of the outcomes that you've identified that needs to be, that the outcomes that you've identified that the person wants to be achieved. Again, it should really clearly reflect their wishes, their strengths, their outcomes. It could be that they want certain things that you actually can't provide, a ground floor flat with a 10-acre garden. Doesn't matter, you can still put it there because that's something that they want to achieve. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a duty to provide it, so just be mindful of that. Be clear on who is going to achieve these outcomes and how. So when you're thinking about writing, say, for example, your timetable about who's doing what, don't just include, the statutory support. So don't just include the domiciliary home care. What are other people doing for that person? Is a neighbour taking that person shopping? Is that person going to a social club? Is a friend dropping in to support with managing finances? So when you're summing up what the outcomes are and who's doing what in a timetable, don't just include the statutory support that's being provided, because that doesn't reflect a true picture of a person's support plan and how their outcomes are being achieved often. Again, think about mental capacity, the principles of best interest and deprivation of liberty safeguards. That's crucial when you're thinking about care and support, particularly for a person who lacks capacity, and interventions have to be within their best interest. So do think about the statutory guidance around that.
We're just going to play a video. There was a question there about how this relates to service users with learning disabilities, about does it work as well with them as with older people? And I think definitely yes is the short answer to that. But I think a kind of prime example of that, most of you probably would have heard of Winterbourne View, the abuse scandal that happened at the hospital, mental health hospital for people with learning disabilities. It was about 8-10 years ago or something. And about that model was about prescriptive care, and it was about hospitalisation, and it was about keeping people safe, quotation marks, in an environment that was very controlled. Now, there's lots of legislation stuff since, like transforming care I mentioned earlier, about kind of moving people out of institutional settings into their own accommodations, supported living, back in their own flats. There was lots of support going in, and in a lot of cases, these have been actually far more expensive than the original residential care thing. But it's a system based then on what they can do and having much more kind of flexibility. And for example, we're doing quite a lot at the moment in Hackney around employment and people with learning disabilities. So we've got the council's taken on quite a lot of people who are have learning disabilities and are open to a supported employment service, and they're doing internships, including one of the admin, the LD team at the moment. Or it could be trying to get them into education and college, all those kind of things, rather than that kind of more institutional setting. So that's going to be a more complex, higher end need learning disability where kind of a strengths-based approach can work. So yes is the short answer. And then we've got a very short video on kind of support planning.
What is a support plan? The purpose of a support plan is to agree how a person's needs are going to be met. Meeting needs is an important concept under the Care Act, as it moves us away from the idea of simply providing services. A person's needs are specific to them, and there are many ways in which they can be met, for example through community or informal support, assistive technology, or traditional services. This shift enables a more creative approach to support planning, one that focuses on the individual and the direction they want their life to take, rather than the provision of existing services. What should a support plan do? Identify short and longer-term outcomes that the person wants to achieve. Explain how these outcomes will be met. Build on the strengths and resources of the person and the community around them. Maximise the person's independence. Identify how much money may be spent to meet the person's eligible needs. Who can be involved in developing a support plan? The person. It is their plan, and the Care Act says they should be as involved as much as they are able to. Social care workers. People the person wants to involve, such as family and friends. Care providers. Independent advocates. If people have substantial difficulty being involved in their support plan and have no family or friends who can support them, they are entitled to the support of an advocate. What is an outcome? Support plans need to detail the person's outcomes. An outcome is what a person will have achieved as a result of any advice and information or support. Developing outcomes. Some common mistakes. Sometimes people confuse aspirations and outcomes and avoid writing down what is important to people because they are worried that people won't achieve it. Aspirations describe what someone wants their life to be in the long term. For example, living in my own home, having a job, having friends. Outcomes describe the specific things that the person will achieve in the short or long term that are taking them towards their aspirations. For example, making their own breakfast. Sometimes people mix up an outcome with a solution. For example, to go to a day centre twice a week to meet my friends Jane and Mary. The outcome is to meet my friends, Mary and Jane, twice a week, and could be met in a variety of different ways. The problem with putting the solution into the outcome is that it takes you down a particular path. Not being clear enough. If an outcome is not specific enough, it is impossible to measure whether it has been achieved and has made a difference to the person. For example, to be healthier is difficult to measure and will mean very different things to different people. To be able to walk 200 metres without being out of breath can be measured. Good support plans which have clear and meaningful outcomes are fundamental to improving a person's well-being.
Okay, so again, there's a little bit on the Care Act 2014 statutory guidance. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this really kind of gives you guidance around the production of the plan. And it kind of sums up everything that we've spoken about previously, but also what the video also talks about as well. So the key words in this for me are person-centred, the individual having every reasonable opportunity to be involved in the planning, to ensure that information is available in a way which is meaningful to the person. So think about the language that you're using, think about how you're writing your support plans, think about how you're giving people information about what's community resources, for example. Think about, again, how they want to develop the plan. Is it alone? Is it with their family? Is it with their friends? So think about that, because that will change depending on the individual that you're working with. So there's just some key words that I wanted to highlight to you, but again, the statutory guidance elaborates more on the production of the plan.
So we're going to go on to the next one again as well. So the model that Hackney Adult Social Care is currently using is called Free Conversations. This is more just an example of how you can implement this approach. This is just one of many different ways, and it's something we brought in external kind of program consultants to kind of advise and kind of do this. But essentially, it means it's a way that we can implement this theory, and there's a real kind of practical, meaningful way that the staff on the ground can actually kind of use it. And also means it's kind of buy-in from senior management and kind of a real kind of systemic change in the way we work. So it's strengths-based, assets, independence, all the things we've been talking about. And in Hackney, it's a free conversation. We'll go on to the next slide. So it's based on, so these free conversations are points in people's journey in adult social care. So conversation one, and these tools are going to reflect the documentation we use as well, will be when someone makes contact with us, and rather than people going on a waiting list, rather than people just kind of going on assessment, wait, we'll see you in 3 weeks, we'll do an assessment then, is when we kind of make contact, spend that initial time, listen, meaningfully connect to that person. So the way we're kind of trialling it is there's the front door service in our local authority. The person who picks up the phone or the email is the person who will kind of take that case initially and work with them almost like a key worker model and spend that kind of initial time. And it might be very brief. It might be one phone call going, you need to go to Citizens Advice Bureau for advice. But it might be a bit more complicated than that. And kind of really listening to what we need. And in terms of forms and the processes, we've really tried to go back to as free text as possible on the forms. We've really changed it. There's devolved powers in terms of funding. So, for example, frontline workers will have prepayment cards where if there's something urgently needed and prevent future needs, they can do that without having to get a very hierarchical bureaucratic approval process. So I'll give you an example of something I worked with. A guy with autism really forgot to take his medication. So what we did, he's really good with technology, so we bought him a voice prompt. So it's an Alexa, but others are available. And we programmed in verbal reminders for doing his medication. And that's an upfront cost of whatever it was, 80 quid for local authority. But if you think he's taking medication 3 times a day, nurses coming in doing that, or care workers coming doing that, longer term, that's a massive cost saving. It's less intrusive for him. If his medication changes, he can change it. Conversation 2 is about kind of more intense work with people in crisis. So again, it's that, going back to what we talked about before, it's just a way of really getting around, having a key worker who can coordinate all the different bits of someone's care. So you might need OTs, speech therapists, your doctor, voluntary sector, having someone who's really a care coordinator, a key worker, someone who's able to kind of coordinate that and really kind of spend time. And that, again, is that kind of evidence that you spend time there, you reduce the need later on. But obviously then, not everyone is going to be independent, not everyone is going to not need statutory support. So that conversation 3 is that more kind of longer term thing where people do need support from councils or health or wherever it might be, and kind of building that long term goal as about what they want to achieve. Do they want to be able to walk to a park and back? Do they want to be able to eat better quality? And that kind of ongoing kind of work.
So just a little bit around why the London Borough of Hackney Adult Services have actually adopted the 3 conversations approach. In a nutshell, other local authorities have tried this approach and tell us it works. So it's always good to listen to your neighbouring boroughs who have had experience in implementing this to take the learning from that. So that's one of the key reasons. Other local authorities have told us it's better for people. So it's personalised, outcomes are better, and their experience of their actual interaction with the council is better than it previously was. So again, it's looking at what the experience of those accessing our services are. Having good quality conversations with people at the right time. So like Alistair mentioned, it's about adopting that 3 conversations model. So it will help us ensure that people have the right support at the right time, whether it's information and advice or whether it's more extensive work to help a person deal with the crisis that they might be going through, which we hope will get better outcomes for people and also help to save us money in the long term, which we've spoken about throughout this webinar. It's better for staff. So other authorities have told us that staff get a lot more job satisfaction as they're able to go back to their professional roots. Now, we've mentioned this previously, that actually this shouldn't be this is actually best practice in terms of how we should be working with people across adult social care and across other areas of social care also. So it's really just going back to our roots in terms of what's fundamental best practice.
And in reality, it means that practitioners, so we have non-qualified social care staff who answer the telephones, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually going out, meeting people, seeing people multiple times, actually building relationships and having autonomy over decision making, rather than, I'm sure many of you experience trying to go for funding panels for every penny you spend, but actually having that kind of autonomy in decision making is giving a lot of better experience for staff. And again, like there are other models, it's just what we've adopted, and it's just a way to having a structure that helps kind of implement this approach. We duplicated that slide.
Yeah. So now we've just got, so that's really the end of our presentation, our webinar, so I hope you enjoyed it. We do have, looking at the clock, around 10 minutes left. Is that 5 minutes left? Sorry. So if you have any questions at this point, please do feel free to ask us, and we'll do our best to answer them. So do feel free to ask your questions. If there aren't any questions at this particular time, do feel free to make a note of some things that you might want to ask at a later date, or that you might want to take to maybe your team meetings where you can discuss it with your managers, your service managers. So if that sort of works better for you, that's absolutely fine as well. And within the presentation, we've also attached a list of sort of further reading, which is really, really helpful in terms of elaborating on some of the points we've spoken about today.
Yeah.
This is not a exhaustive list. It goes on. It's just the ones that we thought were key in terms of further reading.
Okay, so there's no current questions coming in. But as I said, you can always share it on the teaching partnership forums and things as well. But thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful for people.
Thank you.